So welcome to Mentoring, an Essential Leadership Skill. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Rolfe, and I have a background in adult learning and career counselling and professional development. I've been in business for 30 years, and my latest book is Mentoring Mindset Skills and Tools. And I've spoken on this topic in Australia, Canada, China, Singapore, the Philippines, and USA. These webinars are attended by people in all parts of the world. This morning we had people from Korea, the United States, Jamaica, Poland, Canada, as well as Australia registered. So welcome to everybody. And I must just tell you, I do speak mainly from a corporate perspective, but I want you to know that I've worked with not-for-profit organisations, educational institutions like universities and TAFEs, etc., government agencies and community groups. So the content is applicable in those settings as well. In this webinar, we're going to discuss why managers must also be mentors. And I'm going to provide you with quite a bit of evidence that shows the reasoning behind me putting this case to you this morning. I'm going to talk about how a manager mentoring their staff is different from the sort of offline mentors that we often have in our mentoring programs. So in a mentoring program, and I do a lot of work with mentoring programs in organisations, and the mentor is usually matched with someone within the program, and that mentor is not in that person's direct line of authority, so not their boss or their boss's boss, someone who is a step away from them in the organisation. And we're going to talk about what to do to help managers mentor their staff. So in my promotion, I was really pretty blunt. I said resistance is futile. Managers must change. For some, it will be a small step because I do know that there are a lot of managers out there who do mentor their staff, lead their staff really well. But for others, it's going to be a much bigger leap. New demands on managers mean that mentoring is an essential leadership skill. And I want to start by sharing with you the evidence for this statement. And I will provide you with references for this as we go through. But also, if you're watching the recording, I'll put together a list of the references that you can download and check these out for yourself. I believe that managers are the most important people in an organisation because they have the biggest influence on talent retention. If you look at trends worldwide, attracting good people and keeping them and developing them is very high on the agendas of most organisations. And managers are the most important people to influence that. Employee engagement is another area where organisations have been pouring billions into engagement strategies, but actually haven't achieved the results that they're looking for. And yet managers are the people who have most influence on that as well. Managers have a big role to play, perhaps an underutilised role in learning and development. And if you saw my last webinar where we looked at the 70-20-10 concept of learning development in organisations, you'll know that mentors have a much more greater contribution that they can make in that area. And I'll talk about that a little bit more today as well. And finally, we all know that managers have always been responsible for performance, but the way in which they manage performance is actually changing. There are new demands on managers for the way they go about managing the performance of their people. There's a widely used saying that people don't leave jobs, they leave bosses, and there's a fair bit of evidence to actually support that idea as well. And there's a huge cost in losing staff turnover. And an article recently by Karlin Boriensko the cost of employee turnover, and you can Google this and find this one quite easily, actually examined the cost of employee turnover. So if you lose an entry-level staff person, an employee, at one of the lower levels in your organisation, it costs you between 30 to 50% of their annual salary to replace them. If you lose a mid-level employee, it actually jumps up to 150% of their annual salary to replace that person. And if you lose a high level employee, you're looking at 400% of their annual salary to replace them. So we're talking big bucks here. We're looking at a lot of money in staff turnover here. And in fact, it's linked to employee engagement as well. And what you find is that worldwide research shows that the biggest factor in engagement, and this is one of the factors that either keeps employees or turns them off or makes them leave, the biggest factor is the relationship people have with their manager. 70% of employee engagement is down to the relationship with the manager. Only 30% is to do with other variables. So we're looking at the manager and their role in engagement and talent retention as well. In fact, Gallup's worldwide research has identified 2 questions that have the biggest impact on engagement in the workplace and well-being at work and in life. And Gallup have asked a range of questions over many years to millions of people all around the world in many, many different countries, and they've narrowed it down to a couple of questions that have significant impact. The first one is there someone who encourages your development, and do you have the opportunity to do what you do best every day? And the person who is best placed to make sure that employees know that there's someone who cares about their development, someone who's looking at what they do and assigning them work that allows them to do what they do best, is the manager. In this same article that you can look up and find, and I'll provide you the reference for, the advice given, this article was written and directed at graduates going into their first role. And the advice was the single most important thing you can do to help ensure your future success is to find a great manager or a great advisor and mentor. Now, in mentoring programs that I've worked with over the last 20 years, we've been taking care of the second part. We've been providing, linking up people really with great mentors and advisors. But you know what? In the 21st century, that's not good enough. It's not good enough for people to have to look for a mentor outside their manager. Sure, you can always use a mentor who's not your manager, and there are some difference in the sort of mentoring that they'll provide and lots of advantages. But we've got to bring managers into the equation as well. They need to be mentoring their staff. It's a different kind of mentoring, but they need to be in the game as well. And here's some more of why that's important. As we look at the 70-20-10 development concept that's widely adopted by organisations in the workplace today, we actually can see that that only 10% of the learning that people use on the job comes from formal education and training courses. 20% comes from observing role models like managers and mentors, and 70% comes from experience. Now, what that leads some people to conclude is that the manager's role, along with mentors and coaching, is in that 20% area. But I would argue that firstly, learning from experience doesn't actually happen unless someone facilitates that. You know, if you make a mistake and you look back on it and learn from that mistake, or if you actually have great success and take the time out to reflect on it. And that's where mentoring and managers can come in and really make a difference. You know, the best project team I ever worked with, and this was a team that actually built roads constructed tunnels. They were engineers and they had a terrific leader. They had a reputation for bringing their projects in on time and on or under budget. So they were a great team, great track record. And one of the reasons when I talked to their manager about why, what they did to get this high reputation and this high performance, he told me that at the end of every project, they'd have a barbecue to celebrate. But then they'd have a meeting, a debrief meeting, if you like. And what they did in that meeting was to reflect on their experience, to look firstly at what had worked really well for them. Why had they been able to bring this project on time? Why had they come in on or even under budget? To look at what had happened and with a view to putting that into their standard operating procedures, documenting it into their protocols so they could replicate those behaviours in the future and actually, continue to improve their performance. What they also did was to reflect on what hadn't worked so well, mistakes that had been made, things that, that they weren't so happy with. Now, they were very careful when facilitating, this manager was careful when facilitating this part of the conversation. He didn't want people to be pointing the finger of blame at any person. He didn't want to shame them or humiliate them in any way. What he wanted to do, just as with the positive outcomes, he wanted to look at ways in the future that they could eradicate these sorts of things, that they could build standard operating procedures, protocols, procedures, processes that would mean they didn't make those mistakes in their future projects. And so you can see it's the employment of this learning cycle, getting people to reflect on experience so that they can make some informed decisions about actions they will take or things they will stop doing or do differently. We also know that when people go off the job to training courses and conferences and those sorts of things, participants only 16% of participants transfer their learning in a way that improves performance unless they get mentoring and coaching on the job. And again, managers are the best placed people to have those sorts of conversations before the person goes off to training, before they go to the conference, and when they come back, to ensure that there is a bridge, a transfer of learning between that off-the-job experience and the on-the-job process, so that we can see that managers have a big role to play there in the 70, the 20 and the 10 of that 70-20-10 concept. Now, managers have always been responsible for employee performance. But what we know is that managers who are focused and effective at developing their people have teams that outperform those that are not by about 25%. On top of that, many organisations are ditching those old ratings-based performance appraisals in favour of regular performance management conversations led by managers. So if I were to summarise the statistics that I've just given you, and I've got them there if you want to take a note, I'll also provide the references to all of these data to you, because I think they're pretty, and I'd love you to respond. If you've got a thought or an experience of this, if you've got a comment or a question about these, please type that in now. Remember, you can type in anonymously, ANON, before you type in your comment, and I'll share it with the group without mentioning your name. So far I've been talking about managers as being the most important people in the organisation, and I'm hoping that these statistics actually show that managers must mentor. Now, I've got a little poll to share with you now, and I'm just interested to know whether in your organisation, let's have a look, in your organisation, here's the poll coming up now. So can you respond? You can choose more than one of the responses here, but let us know. We have a mentoring program with mentors who are offline. So this is very common. This is where I do most of my work, in mentoring programs in all sorts of different organisations that match people with mentors who are offline. And by offline, I mean it's got nothing to do with the internet. It's got to do with the line of authority. So they're not in the direct line of authority. They don't have responsibility over the people they mentor. They are not the person's boss or their boss's boss. They're off to the side somewhere else in the organisation. I'd love to know if in your organisation you've actually assigned this responsibility to mentors. They know that they are expected to have managers, at least, know that they're expected to mentor their subordinates. And I know I'm working with at least one New South Wales government agency where they have rewritten the role of managers to include these types of mentoring and coaching conversation. And I'm going in there to do some training of the managers so that they have the knowledge and skills, because they have the responsibility and the authority. So now we need to give them the skills that they can fulfill that. Perhaps in your organisation, mentoring is informal. You're not even sure who mentors whom. So let us know that. And if something else is relevant to this, well, you can type that into the comments box. Looking forward to your input and sharing. I love it when people share, because you don't want to just hear from me. You can hear from your colleagues right around the world. So let me close this poll now. I think everyone's probably had a chance to vote. So I'll close that and share the results with you. So, okay, so what we've got here. Okay, not today. This is the second time I've run the webinar today. These results were different in the earlier poll. So, yeah, we do expect managers to mentor their subordinates, and along with that, you have some informal mentoring. So about 50-50 there. So thanks for sharing that. I'll put that away now, and we'll continue with the slides. Oops, they're going crazy here, so let's go back. Okay, so I want to talk to you about how a manager mentoring their staff is different from the offline mentor in a mentoring program. So one of the great benefits of a mentoring program where you're assigned a mentor, or you're matched up with a mentor who's not in your management authority chain, is that you have an objective sounding board for your ideas, someone with whom you can have a confidential conversation about your aspirations, your dreams, and your challenges. You can plan the next step in your career development, or sometimes just vent your frustration before figuring out a practical solution to problems. That's why we choose mentors who are offline, not the manager or somebody in the direct line of authority above the mentoree in most programs. People do need that independent, objective person with no other agenda or responsibility, where the authority doesn't get in the way. But let's also look at what managing and mentoring, what mentors and managers actually have in common, because I think there are some similarities here. You know, I believe that both your mentor and your manager are there to bring out your best. I think that both manager and mentor should be developing capabilities, looking at what your strengths are and helping you to develop those into the sort of capabilities that are applicable in your career, in your job, and in your life. And I certainly think that both manager and mentor are there to challenge and support you. So let's have a look at some of the similarities and differences then. So we've looked at the similarities. Let's kind of contrast managing and mentoring. And I'll just give you a heads up. I'm going to invite your comments and your feedback and your questions as I go through a table layer by layer. And I just want to tell you, I had a hard time as I was putting this together, because I had this voice in my head as I tried to contrast managing and mentoring. I was saying to myself, I had this voice that was saying, yeah, but wouldn't you want managers to also be doing these things? And I think it's true. And once I've gone through the two contrasting columns, I'll insert a third column that really kind of is a blend of the two. When we have got a manager who's also mentoring their staff, or a manager using a mentoring style as their management style. So let's have a look first at the contrast. In managing, we are looking at individual and team outcomes, whereas when we're mentoring, it's really about personal goals, and we hone in on the person's own goals. When we're managing, we have a team focus. In mentoring, it's purely an individual focus. We don't have to worry so much about what's going on in the team. That's not our responsibility. We're having a mentoring relationship with a particular individual. When we're managing, we're concentrating on leading the person. When we're mentoring, we're facilitating a mentoring conversation. When we're managing, we have the authority, and it's sometimes necessary to give the person direction, to tell them what to do, to assign them tasks. Whereas when we're mentoring, what we're doing in that conversation is getting the person to reflect on what's going on for themselves, on their own experience, to really think about that, set their own personal goals, and then plan the action that they'll take to achieve those goals. In managing, we might find ourselves showing and telling people what to do, whereas in mentoring, the role is much more about listening and asking. Managing is very much a work relationship. It's about getting work done, about achieving workplace outcomes, whereas mentoring is a much more holistic relationship, and we take into account more aspects of the person that we might otherwise do in a workplace relationship. Managing, we have responsible for performance management, naturally enough. We are expected to manage the performance of that individual, whereas mentors don't have that kind of responsibility. They're not responsible for the day-to-day performance of the person, and their focus then is on personal and professional development. A manager must evaluate the performance, whereas mentoring is far less judgmental. We encourage mentors, and in the training workshops that I run, we encourage mentors to put aside their judgment, any prejudice they might have, any evaluation that they might normally do in other roles. They put that aside. They suspend judgment. They're purely there on the side of the person to collaborate with them. Now, when we're managing people, there's certain information that we have to share. When we evaluate performance, maybe we've got to put in reports about a person's performance. Whereas when we're mentoring, those conversations are completely confidential. They don't go anywhere else. There's no reporting on the person. Our conversations are strictly between us and them. I wonder what your thoughts are as you look at these contrasts. I wonder if, like me, you're saying, well, wouldn't you want managers who also mentor? And my answer, I guess I'm biased, but my answer is, yeah, we do. So please feel free to type in your comments or your questions, your observations, your experience. Remember, you can type the letters ANON, and I won't mention your name as I share what your experience is. So let's have a look at this third column now. It gets a bit complicated, but we can start from the middle at the top. And we see that a manager who is also mentoring their staff, or has a mentoring style of management, actually links personal goal to team aims. So they work with the individual, they find out what their goals and aims and their values are, and help to link those, to make the connection between what's important for an individual and what's important for the team. And whilst the manager focuses on a team, they can also focus on the individual's contribution team. So there's kind of a blending of the two there. The third one down, the manager is responsible for leading the person. The mentor facilitates the conversation. So a manager who is mentoring is leading a conversation. I often talk about mentoring in the moment. So these conversations don't need to be, a long sit-down conversation. They can be an opportunistic conversation when the manager sees an opportunity to provide some feedback to their subordinate, when the manager sees something that they can comment on and draw that into a mentoring conversation, they can do so. The fourth one down, we're looking at when we're managing, we have the responsibility from time to time to give direction to our subordinates. We are a manager. We sometimes need to tell them what to do or give them work assignments to do. Whereas in mentoring, we're more about getting them to think, reflect, and act. So in the middle ground there, the manager who mentors, it's a collaboration. It is getting them engaged, getting their input, and having that conversation and getting them to moving towards the outcomes that we want. Likewise, in the communication, whereas a manager may need to be doing more showing and telling, the mentoring is more about listening and asking. The manager who is mentoring has a two-way flow of communication, so using that mentoring style. Whereas a managing role is focused on a work relationship, mentoring has a holistic relationship. The manager who's using that mentoring style is trying to foster this interdependent relationship that tends to get the results and engage people. And while a manager is responsible for performance of their subordinate, there is that more of a personal and professional development role to that. And whilst a manager evaluates performance, so does a manager who's mentoring, but it's more around giving feedback, giving positive feedback, and people don't get enough of that in the workplace, as well as the corrective feedback that keeps us on track. And as a manager must sometimes share some information, they must sometimes report on the performance of their staff, we need to understand that the management style using mentoring also still is not the same as that confidential. It doesn't have the privilege of that confidentiality that an offline mentor might have. So looking for any comments or questions that you might have, just want to type those in. I'll pause in a moment to take a look at those. So just now, let's make very clear distinctions for when a manager is mentoring their staff and those offline mentoring relationships in a formal program. So when the manager is mentoring, they will drive the relationship. They'll be looking for the opportunities to have a conversation with their subordinate. They'll be picking opportunities, looking for opportunities, looking at comments that they can make to engage their staff to have this kind of conversation. In a mentoring program, when I train people who are going to be mentored, I like to get the message across that it's actually the mentoree, the person being mentored, needs to drive this relationship. They need to take responsibility for getting the most out of it, making contact with the mentor, having an agenda, having goals that they want to achieve, and having opportunities for those conversations. The other difference, and I've touched on this already, is disclosure and confidentiality. There are things that you might share with an offline mentor that you wouldn't necessarily want to speak with your manager about, even if they are actually mentoring you. And those confidentiality privileges that apply to an offline mentor that don't apply in a workplace manager kind of role. It really depends on the level of trust and confidence that the pair have with each other, but we need to be mindful that those are differences. Now, the offline mentor is also going to be more engaged or more involved in personal development, whereas the workplace manager is probably going to focus a lot more on your professional or the professional development of their subordinates. Although there's a lot of people who would argue, and I'm one of them actually, that personal development these days is professional development as well. So could you think of any other major differences? We'll just check and see what comments there are now. And I'm just wondering whether in your career you've actually had mentors yourself. So why don't you share in this poll, and you can choose more than one response here again. Does your manager mentor you right now? Have you had a manager in the past who has mentored you? Or have you not ever had a manager who's mentored you? And you can type in a comment into the question or the chat box as well if you want to have that response. Okay, just looking to see. Okay, looks like everyone's probably had enough time on that. Let's close that. Okay, and let me share the results with you. These are a bit frightening. Okay. On the line at the moment, and this is a small sample group, but actually never had a manager who's mentored you. Now, that is truly frightening because I know there are a lot of managers out there who do mentor, and I also know there are plenty who don't. And in fact, when I'm talking to people in mentoring programs, some of the reasons they're in mentoring programs is because managers don't mentor. We have to change that. We absolutely have to change that statistic around. So let's put that away and let's then go on and have a look at what we can do about this, because we know that employees thrive when leaders take a genuine interest in them. You get commitment when you align employees' goals and values with team aims. I have a friend who is a small business owner, and she's invested a lot of time in studying values and learning about values. And she sat down with each and every one of her staff and looked at their values and how they can be aligned with the goals and values of the business. And so when you can show people, when you can link their values and their goals with the goals and values of your organisation, then you get engagement, you get commitment, you can have conversations that have real value to both the manager, because you learn about how to get the best out of this person, and to the staff member, because they learn that you care and that this is not just a job that they're doing, it's actually something that's important to them. And my friend is highly skilled at doing this and has staff, as a result, has staff who will go above and beyond. And also she learns how to invest in their ongoing development, and those that are going to be there with her for the long term and those who might be there for a shorter term, and where best to place and invest in those people. We also know that there is a lot more we can gain from feedback. In one of the webinars I run that's specifically about feedback, I share a case study about an organisation who introduced feedback, and this goes beyond the feedback that managers give to their staff. They came up with something called the 10-5 feedback model, and it involved every single person in their organisation giving and receiving feedback. And when that was introduced, it actually had a significant impact on their bottom line results. And so we know that we can do a lot more with feedback, especially positive feedback. There's a lot of emphasis on, giving corrective feedback, and that's important too. But people don't get nearly enough positive feedback, and there are ways you can do that as well. And it makes a difference to people. It engages people. It gains their commitment. It builds their trust. It builds the relationship that managers have with their subordinates. And the other thing we know is that there's a huge reservoir of untapped potential And when managers can provide opportunities for development and growth, it actually adds to productivity, it adds to engagement, it helps retain staff, and of course it delivers value for the individuals and the organisations as well. In fact, there's a very interesting article from the Ken Blanchard companies called The High Cost of Doing Nothing, and their research has identified they think that organisations lose $1 million a year in untapped potential. So people there within your organisation who have talents, who have strengths that are not being fully utilised. So let's look at what we need to do to help managers mentor. What we want them to do is to use a mentoring style, if you like, to mentor their staff when they are setting the team goals, when they are aligning individual goals, personal goals with team goals to get the outcomes that they want. We want them to apply a mentoring style when the team is looking at problems and issues together, and we want them to apply mentoring to team decisions and individual decisions as well. How can they do that? Well, one of the ways is to employ mentoring conversations. And many of you will have seen this model. It's in my book, Mentoring Mindset, Skills and Tools. If you've been on webinars before, you've probably seen this model before. It's a model that's based on adult learning, on action learning. It's based on classic decision making and problem solving as well. And it's based on asking questions. Now, these are not the questions that you're going to ask. These are the questions you hold in your mind to frame up the appropriate question to ask in your particular situation. So question number one in the mentoring conversation is, where are you now? So you can see we're getting people to reflect on experience. We're asking them about the current situation. What's going on for them? What's the problem? What's the issue? What are the causes? What are the symptoms? What is going on at the moment? What's the current situation? And then we can, once we've really drawn that out and talked about that, then we can move on to the next part of this conversation. Where do you want to be? What's the goal? What's the vision? What's the mission, if you like? How do we want this situation to be? What would an ideal outcome actually look like? We then want to allow people to make informed decisions about the action they'll take and plan that action. So we start to talk about how might we get there and get some options, get some possibilities, get some alternatives generated so that we can choose a course of action, a strategy that's going to make the most difference. So finally, we've got a plan, we've got a goal, we've got a plan, we understand what's going on. So we come back later on, having implemented that plan, and reflect again and start to talk about, okay, what happened? How's it going now? How are you doing now? What did we do and how did that work out for us? So that's the mentoring conversation. You see, what we need to do is provide people with the skills, provide them with a model, a framework, if you like, to use those skills. And we also need to educate them about their role so that managers see that what they are responsible for is leading engagement, leading learning, leading people's performance, and also drawing out the potential of people. So we need to help people to develop mentoring skills, and you can do that through workshops. Again, I'm in quite a few organisations at the moment running workshops on this specific topic for managers. So the manager as mentor, developing those mentoring skills, skilling them up in using and helping them practice that mentoring conversation. And of course, we can run webinars on that as well. And one of the best ways to get mentors on board is to mentor them, to facilitate them having mentoring experiences themselves. The other thing you can do is have them as mentors in your program. And I've had a lot of success with managers who join a mentoring program to mentor someone who's not in their own team or in their own part of the organisation. And as a result of the training they receive and as a result of the experience they have, they actually take that knowledge and that skill back to their own team and start to incorporate that into their own management style. So they effectively become managers themselves. So another quick poll here, different one this time. I'm going to invite you to respond to. So poll's coming up now. So tell me, what's the situation in your organisation? Do you think your managers have the skills to mentor their staff? Are they motivated to use those skills? Have they been mentored themselves, or are they mentoring others? Or is there some other information that you'd like to share with us? Again, you can share that anonymously, ANON, before your comment, and I'll share that with you. Okay. Okay, just waiting for your responses there. You can choose more than one response. Do you think your mentors actually have the skills? Are they motivated to use them? Have they been mentored? Now, if there's another response, I'd like you to type something in response to this idea. Where are your managers in terms of mentoring? Okay, I'm going to close that up. I think everyone's voted now. Share the results with you. Okay, so there's something else going on out there. So can you type in and share something on that? What is your response? Do your managers mentor? If they're not mentoring, is there a reason why that is? I'll read your response without sharing your name. Let me put that away. Okay. Okay, I'll come back to this in just a moment then to give you some time. Okay, so so far we've talked about why managers must also be mentors, and how a manager mentoring their staff is different from those offline mentors you usually get in a mentoring program, and what to do to help managers mentor. I see some comments coming in now. I'm going to invite questions as well, and I'll come back to those shortly. Let's have a look at the comments. So please type in your questions as well. I'll read these anonymously. Don't think they have the skills to mentor or are interested in doing so. Yeah, and that has been very much the case in a lot of organisations. I may have mentioned to you that a New South Wales government agency that I'm working with at the moment has actually rewritten the roles, the role description of their managers to include mentoring and coaching in the role. So that will be part of their performance that they need to actually live up to. So they are providing some training for those managers in the mentoring and the coaching style of management. And increasingly we're seeing that that will be part of what a manager is doing. I guess it's pretty leading edge at the moment, but it will certainly be being brought in more extensively. Okay, another comment. I'm the most experienced person in the area the company is working in, but my managers could be sharing their knowledge of entrepreneurship. Okay, so I guess that that's a conversation you can be having with those managers to perhaps share with some of the statistics that I've shared with you. I'll provide the references for those. And even this webinar, the recording will be available for about 30 days after today. So you can share that recording if you want to with other managers while it's up on the website. So you can be typing in your questions now. We're coming up into the last segment of the webinar, which is really about responding to your questions. So just while those questions are coming in, I just want to give you a heads up on the next webinar. which is on the 5th or 6th of May, depending on where in the world you are. I'm here in Australia, but people join us from right around the world, and we're 14 hours ahead of some places in the world. So it will be Friday the 6th of May here in Australia, but it might still be Thursday the 5th of May in places like the US or Canada or other European countries. So the next webinar, what's going on with employee engagement, why it's not working, and how managers and mentors can turn it around. So I touched on that in this webinar, but I'll be providing a lot more depth in the next webinar and much more specific around that whole engagement piece and what mentors and managers can do in that area. Also want to let you know, if you enjoy these webinars and see the value of having something designed especially for you and specific to your mentoring program, your mentors, or indeed your managers, you can talk to me about that. I can design something specific for you. I've also got 4 webinars where the core content is already designed around mentoring, and we tailor that to you, and we run it at a time that that's suitable for you and your participants. And finally, just letting you know that one of those core content webinars is mentoring in the art of feedback, but it can just as easily be managers in the art of feedback. So if you'd like to get your managers more aware of how they can give feedback, the techniques of doing that, and why it's important, then that's something that I can run specifically for you. So do send me an email, give me a call, and we can talk about running webinars especially for you. So what I'm interested in now is hearing from you, and you can type in your questions. The rest of the webinar will really be about your questions, but I'd really like some feedback as well. What are your key takeaways? What would be the key points you'll take from this webinar, and what will be the action? So how will you actually implement that going forward? So start typing in. And any other questions or comments or observations you have, I'm happy to read those out anonymously without your name. So start to type in now. And the rest of the webinar, we've got 10 minutes up our sleeve, so plenty of time for questions, comments, and I'm keen to know what your key takeaways and actions are. So I'll pause for a moment, give you a chance to type something in. So I will actually stop the recording now. So if you're watching the recording, thanks for joining us. Do look for the article down below and the list of references for this webinar. And I look forward to joining you on a live webinar sometime soon.